Welcome to this explainer. And look, today we're not looking at data points or quarterly reports. No, we're stepping right into a grim Gothic fable. You can call me the wit, and I'll be your guide today as we observe a grand tragedy from the white spaces of the map. We're going to examine the magnificent and frankly tragic dangers of a rigid ego. We're about to watch a so-called master of the storm try to force the entire world into his perfect, unyielding mold. And, well, we'll witness exactly how the universe responds to that kind of suffocating arrogance. So get a load of this quote: "Truth is the thunder." It's a perfectly arrogant claim, isn't it? Dinar, the master of the storm, genuinely believed this. He thought cosmic rot could simply be purged with a single, deafening, cleansing strike of his will. He operated under this grand illusion of absolute certainty. He was completely convinced that his thunderous decrees were the only reality. But as we unpack this cautionary fable, you'll see that when you build a worldview out of pure, unyielding thunder, you leave yourself entirely deaf to the subtle music of the world. Okay, let's dive into this. Act 1. The papier-mâché God. Exposing the illusion of absolute certainty. I want you to picture Donar standing on this rocky precipice, overlooking a dying Valhalla, gripping his heavy stone hammer. He was preparing to deliver a blow of absolute negation that he thought would burn the treacherous clean. He completely projected this image of immutable granite, right? An unquestioned master, unyielding to anything but his own will. But actually, the reality of the so-called overman was far more pathetic. As the wit, I didn't even need to challenge him with a weapon. I merely acted as a distorting mirror. Literally, just a single tap on the chin along with a burst of cynical laughter completely revealed the truth. His immutable stone, it was actually just a papier-mâché mask. That hard grip was just a cage for his trembling hands. A single moment of reflection turned his divine rage into a heap of delightful absurdity. Moving on to Act 2, the architecture of negation. The fatal flaws of Valhalla. You see, Darner's environment totally mirrored his fragile mindset. Let's take a hard look at the specific architectural failure points of Valhalla and the logic he used to sustain it. He actually believed his foundation was divine right, but in reality it was built on stolen timber. He envisioned perfect order, but what he actually constructed were static moral cathedrals, these gray blueprints holding the world breathless. He considered his realm impenetrable. No way. It was absolutely riddled with neglected traumas. And his ultimate design flaw? He aimed for kingly glory, but his rigid, static control only produced the wretched contentment of the last man. Let this be a warning to us. Trying to maintain absolute, unyielding control doesn't build a utopia. It builds an infinite dungeon of terminal mediocrity. Which brings us to Act 3, the siblings' chaotic medicine, the interference of chaos. Now, into this infinite dungeon of terminal mediocrity, chaos absolutely must intrude to act as an essential pressure valve. Enter the spirit siblings. First up, we have a force known as the hunger, essentially a void in the logic. When Donner drafted his lightning with precise equations of thunderous justice, expecting a magnificent kingly crash, the hunger stepped right into the path of the storm, because to this beast, the god's rigid expectations were deeply nutritious. It simply swallowed the threads of his order, inhaling the raw power of the sky and turning his blinding blue-white bolts into nothing more than a wet black slurry. And next, we have the small. She's a breeze that introduces artful mistakes. When Donar raised his hammer for the ultimate strike to smash the world's foundations, the small was right there, just dancing around the edges of the apocalypse. She offered Donar a gentle hiccup in the rhythm of his swing. She introduced an unpredictable whim, just a breeze intended to trip him out of his rigid gait and spare the world his fury. Basically, she offered him a chance to let the calcified world dance instead of shatter. Let's move to see how this builds and watch this chaotic medicine work in sequence. Step 1. Dornar drafts his precise, perfect equations of thunderous justice. But immediately, in Step 2, the hunger devours that rigid logic, turning the storm into a wet slurry and creating a massive cacophony of confusion for the thunder god. And finally, Step 3, the small steps in, offering that artful mistake, that gentle hiccup to redirect the devastating blow. The universe is practically begging Dornar to let go of his absolute certainty and embrace the unscripted comedy of becoming. And that leads right into Act 4, the erupting spire, the catastrophe of the kingly fool. But as we know, a kingly fool rarely listens. Trapped entirely in his own ego, Donner fought the whim. He flat out refused the hiccup. He doubled down on his certainty and forced his blow to land directly upon his target, the bound's blight. Now, track this disastrous chain reaction with me. The very first second the strike lands, it doesn't shatter the shadow. No, it ignites a hidden peristic blood oath, alchemically colliding divine lightning with shadow energy. Instantly, in that second, the thorn of twilight erupts, not from the heavens like a righteous bolt, but from the very foundations of the world. By the third second, Valhalla is impaled from below. The sheer weight of its neglected traumas thrusts this jagged spire upward, completely turning those static moral cathedrals into splinters. And finally, the fourth second, the soot-choked ascent as the golden void tilts, shatters, and just falls. And so, the world did not end in a glorious kingly crash. It was, as the quote says, a justified termination, swallowed in soot and absolute freezing dark. I mean, what a pathetic end for the kingly fool, the overman who completely failed to correctly go under. By trying to enforce absolute perfection and striking his own foundations, his divine ego only succeeded in hammering the lid onto his own tomb. The hunger actually mocked him as he sank into the void, pointing out that his precise strike was just far too rigid for a world that simply yearned to dance. This sets the stage for Act 5, The Jester's Wet Ink, the Wanderer's Path of Liberation. Now, throughout this entire disaster, someone else was watching from the white spaces of the map, the Wanderer. He saw the Master of the Storm impaled by his own absolute certainty. Look at the two paths before us here. Dorner's legacy is the ash of the god, static stone, a scripted tragedy ending in a final period of ash. But instead of repeating that mistake, the Wanderer chose the wet ink of the Jester. Seeing those soot-choked ruins, he lets the chaotic medicine of the spirit siblings pool at his feet. He allows his own iron hammer of genealogy to dissolve into a wooden Jester's wand. He completely trades absolute negation for creative freedom, intentionally leaving the page damp so he can write the next line in the unscripted comedy of becoming. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between the two approaches. So the absolutely crucial takeaway of our dark fable is this. To truly live is to embrace the amphitheater of becoming. This is the core Nietzschean truth of the entire tragedy. Listen, true self-improvement, true enlightenment, it isn't about achieving some unyielding static perfection. It's not about enforcing your truth like thunder. It is about messy, unscripted improvisation. It's about being willing to go under, to accept the artful mistakes, and to step onto a stage where the ink is always, always wet. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a rather haunting question. Is your pursuit of perfection building a stone tomb or an amphitheater of becoming? When the breath of chaos offers you a gentle hiccup, are you going to force your rigid gait and hammer the lid onto your own papier-mâché ego? Or will you dissolve your hammer into a jester's wand and dance? Think carefully about that. And whatever you do, make sure your ink is still wet.